Amara adjusted the strap of her tote bag, the worn canvas a stark contrast to the glacial white marble of the lobby. The air in the Elysian Tower was different. It was colder, thinner, scrubbed clean of the city's grit, and smelling faintly of white tea and money. After a 12-hour shift in the chaotic warmth of the emergency room, the transition was always a shock to the system. The exhaustion of her day job was a physical weight, a leaden cloak she tried to shrug off before beginning her night shift here. This was her second job, the one that paid for her mother's care facility, the one that might, one day, allow her to breathe. Private nursing for a reclusive, post-operative patient on the penthouse floor. Mr. Kang. She had only been on the assignment for a week, but a routine had already formed. She would arrive at 7:55 p.m., show her credentials to the evening doorman, take the private elevator, and relieve the day nurse. It was a job defined by quiet competence, the very thing she excelled at. Tonight, however, the routine was broken. A new man stood before the gleaming brass doors of the private elevator. He was built like a refrigerator, wide and solid, poured into a security uniform that was a size too tight, the fabric straining at his shoulders and biceps. He had the kind of posture that was meant to look relaxed, but was actually a performance of dominance, a swagger in stillness. Amara approached, offering a small professional nod. "Good evening. I'm going to the penthouse." The man, whose name tag read Marcus, looked her up and down. It was not a glance. It was an inventory, slow and insolent. His eyes lingered on her scrubs, her worn but clean sneakers, the simple gold hoops in her ears, her dark skin. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a file compiled from prejudice and assumption. "And?" His voice was a low rumble, thick with challenge. Amara kept her own voice even, the practiced calm of 1,000 frantic ERs. "I'm Mr. Kang's night nurse. My name is Amara Okoro. I'm on the approved list." Marcus smirked, a small, ugly twist of his lips. "I don't have a list. I have my eyes. And what I see is someone who doesn't belong here." The words hung in the sterile air. They were not new. She had heard variations of them her whole life, in different tones, in different rooms. But here, in this cathedral of wealth, they felt particularly sharp, designed to slice her down to nothing. She felt a familiar, weary ache settle behind her ribs. It was the quiet exhaustion of long-term suffering. She did not raise her voice. She did not show the flash of anger that sparked in her gut. "If you would please check with the head of Mr. Kang's security, Mr. Jin, he will confirm my access. Or you can call up to the penthouse. The day nurse is waiting to give me a report." "I don't need to check with anyone," Marcus said, taking a half-step forward, using his physical presence to crowd her space. "My job is to keep people like you out." People like you. The phrase was a blunt instrument. He wanted a reaction. He wanted her to get loud, to cry, to prove his assessment of her correct. She did not scream. She took a deliberate, small step back, reclaiming her space. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a sharp terror mixing with the bone-deep fatigue. "You are mistaken," she said, her voice dropping, becoming colder, more precise. "And you are preventing me from doing my job, a job which I assure you I was hired to do." "Cute," he sneered. "Got the uniform and everything. You can buy those online, you know. Now, I'm going to ask you to leave the building before I have to remove you." He reached out, his hand a fleshy slab of meat, and grabbed her arm just above the elbow. His grip was tight, bruising. It was a violation. A line crossed. All the practiced calm she held so carefully within her fractured. The exhaustion of her 12-hour shift, the constant worry about her mother, the 1,000 tiny cuts of a life spent navigating spaces that were not built for her. It all coalesced into a single point of cold, clear fury. "Let go of my arm," she said. The words were not a request. They were ice. His grip tightened. "I don't think so. We're going for a little walk." It was then that the lobby changed. It was not a loud event. It was the opposite, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. The hushed conversation of a couple waiting for the main elevator bank faded mid-sentence. The gentle ambient music that was always playing seemed to simply evaporate. The doorman, who had been studiously ignoring the confrontation, froze, his posture suddenly rigid. Marcus felt the shift, his head snapping toward the source of the sudden heavy quiet. He stood by a marble pillar, half hidden in shadow, as if he had materialized from the cool, polished stone itself. He was not a large man, but his presence occupied the entire volume of the cavernous lobby. He wore a charcoal suit tailored with an architect's precision, a white shirt, no tie. His black hair was immaculate. His face was still, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on the point where Marcus's hand was clamped around Amara's arm. It was Mr. Kang. He did not rush. He was not performing. He simply observed, and in his observation, the world rearranged itself. Marcus's performative confidence began to leak away, replaced by a dawning, frantic confusion. He had not updated the file on his patient. He was working from a version of Mr. Kang, bedridden, weak, unseen, that had never been accurate. Mr. Kang took a slow, deliberate step out of the shadow. His movements were fluid, unhurried. He was a predator who had no need to chase. He looked at Marcus, but his voice, when it came, was directed at Amara. It was low, calm, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Are you all right, Miss Okoro?" Amara found she could breathe again. The sound of her own name, spoken with such quiet respect in this place of public humiliation, was a balm. She nodded, unable to form words. "Mr." Kang's gaze finally shifted, landing on Marcus. It was not a hot glare. It was cold, like the bottom of the ocean. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Let go of her." The command was not a suggestion. It was a statement of inevitable outcome. Marcus's hand flew open as if he'd touched a live wire. He took a stumbling step back, his face paling, the arrogant smirk replaced by a mask of slack-jawed panic. "Sir, I didn't know. I was just... She doesn't have clearance. I was providing security," he stammered, the words tumbling out, clumsy and pathetic. Mr. Kang gave a nearly imperceptible nod toward the entrance. A second man, who had been standing just as silently near the door, detached himself from the wall. This was Jin, the head of security, a man whose quiet efficiency was legendary among the building staff. He moved without wasted motion. "Mr." Kang spoke again, his voice still low, almost conversational. "You are no longer employed here. The company you work for is no longer contracted by this building. You will leave your access card and your uniform with Mr. Jin, and you will never set foot in this borough again." He paused, his eyes flicking back to Amara, who was rubbing the bruised flesh of her arm. His expression tightened infinitesimally. "You are very lucky Miss Okoro is a forgiving woman. I am not." Jin was beside Marcus now. He did not touch him. He simply stood there, an immovable fact. Marcus, his face a mess of sweat and fear, began to babble. "Please, sir, it was a misunderstanding. I have a family. I was just doing my job." "Your job, mister," Kang said, his voice dropping even further, becoming as soft and sharp as a shard of glass, "was to be invisible. It was to be a functioning part of a system. You chose to be a problem. Problems are removed." He turned his back on the man, a gesture of dismissal so complete it was an annihilation. He looked at Amara. "The elevator is waiting." The brass doors were already open. As she walked toward them, she heard Jin's quiet voice behind her. "This way." She did not look back to see Marcus being escorted out of the building, out of his job, out of his life as he knew it. She stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut, encasing her in a small, silent box of polished wood and bronze with the most powerful man she had ever met. The ride up to the penthouse was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled the lobby. This one was heavy with unspoken things, with the lingering shock of the confrontation and the disorienting reality of her rescuer. "Mr." Kang stood on the opposite side of the elevator car, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He did not look at her. instead fixing his gaze on the floor indicator as the numbers climbed. Amara's professionalism, the armor she had worn for years, began to reassemble itself piece by piece. She was his nurse. He was her patient. She straightened her back, smoothed down the front of her scrubs, and tucked a stray braid behind her ear. Her arm throbbed with a dull, blooming ache. "Thank you," she said. The words felt small, inadequate for what had just happened. Mr. Kang's eyes met hers in the reflection of the polished bronze wall. "It was my failure. The security protocol was insufficient. It will be corrected." It was a strange apology, not because he was sorry, but because he was taking responsibility for a structural flaw. He saw the incident not as a personal insult, but as a system failure. It was both chilling and, in a strange way, deeply reassuring. He was new, she offered, not to excuse Marcus, but to fill the quiet. "His newness is irrelevant," Mr. Kang stated flatly. "He was tested, and he failed, spectacularly." The elevator chimed softly, and the doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The space was vast, a sea of pale wood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the glittering tapestry of the city at night. The air smelled of old books and something clean, like rain on stone. An elderly woman with a ramrod-straight posture and hair the color of snow stood waiting for them. She wore a simple silk blouse and dark trousers, and her eyes, as dark and intelligent as Mr. Kang's, immediately found Amara. "You are here," the woman said, her English accented but precise. She came forward and, to Amara's surprise, took her hand, her touch gentle but firm. "I am Mr. Kang's mother. I saw on the camera. Are you hurt?" Her gaze fell to the red marks already purpling on Amara's arm. The woman's lips thinned into a severe line. She looked at her son. "This is what happens when you hire fools, Jaehua." "It has been handled, Mother," he said, his voice losing some of its iron command, softening slightly in her presence. The old woman ignored him, her focus entirely on Amara. "Come, sit down. The day nurse can wait. You will have some tea." She led Amara into the main living area, a cavernous room with minimalist furniture, a grand piano in one corner, and an entire wall dedicated to books. It was not a home that shouted its wealth. It whispered it in the quality of the light, the grain of the wood, the profound, peaceful quiet. She was settled into a low-slung armchair that was surprisingly comfortable. Mr. Kang's mother disappeared and returned moments later with a tray bearing a delicate porcelain teapot and 2 small cups. She poured the tea, a fragrant, pale liquid, and handed a cup to Amara. The warmth seeped into her hands. "I was a nurse, a long time ago," the old woman said, sitting opposite her. "In a country that no longer exists in the same way. I know the strength it takes, and I know the foolishness of men who mistake that strength for weakness." She took a sip of her tea, her eyes sharp and assessing over the rim of the cup. "My son, he is a collector of rare things. Not just art, people. He told me he had found the most competent nurse at the hospital. He said you were quiet and you saw everything. He insisted you be the one to care for him here." Amara stared into her cup. The revelation landed with a quiet thud in her chest. It had not been a random assignment from the nursing agency. He had chosen her. He had seen her, not as a uniform, not as a function, but as an individual with a specific, valuable skill set. The quiet hours she'd spent in his hospital room, checking his vitals, adjusting his lines, making meticulous notes, speaking to him in low, calm tones even when he was barely conscious. None of it had gone unnoticed. He had been observing her long before she was truly aware of him. The disorienting relief of being seen, of being correctly identified, was overwhelming. It was a validation she hadn't realized she was starving for. Mr. Kang entered the room, having shed his suit jacket. He now wore just the crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing intricate tattoos that snaked up his skin, dark ink against pale flesh. He stopped a few feet away, his presence a silent inquiry. "Miss Okoro," he said, his tone formal. "My mother is correct. I requested you specifically. What happened in the lobby was an unacceptable breach. I am making you an offer. Your contract with the nursing agency is terminated, effective immediately. I will triple their rate and pay you directly. You will have a permanent security detail to and from this building. Your safety, while in my employ, is not negotiable. It is a statement of fact. It was not a question. It was a restructuring of her reality. He was not asking her to stay. He was informing her of the new terms of her existence, terms that included a level of safety and financial security she could barely comprehend. It was a gilded cage, perhaps, but for the first time in a long time, the bars felt like protection, not confinement. She looked from his intense, unblinking gaze to his mother's wise, knowing face. The exhaustion was still there, a deep thrumming beneath her skin. But something else was there now, too. A cold, clear clarity, a sense of being correctly placed. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I accept." In the days that followed, Amara's life was fundamentally altered. The transition was seamless, executed with the silent, frictionless efficiency that seemed to define Mr. Kang's world. A contract appeared, delivered by a lawyer whose suit probably cost more than her car. It was simple, direct, and absurdly generous. The money, a direct deposit that appeared in her account that same day, was enough to pay for her mother's care for a year in advance. An entire year. The relief was so profound it felt like a physical loosening in her chest, a muscle she hadn't realized was clenched for a decade finally letting go. A black town car, sleek and silent as a shadow, now waited for her at the beginning and end of every shift. The driver, a polite man named Mr. An, who never spoke unless spoken to, would simply nod and open the door. It was a small, daily ritual that felt both outlandish and deeply calming. The fear that had become a low-grade, constant companion, the fear of walking to her car late at night, of the dark corners of the hospital parking garage, was simply gone. He had not just removed a threat, he had re-engineered her environment to preclude one. She processed the shift in increments. There was a part of her, the part that had been self-reliant for so long, that bristled at the feeling of being handled. It felt like a surrender of her hard-won independence. But the gratitude was a stronger current. He had not offered pity. He had not been gallant. He had identified a problem, her vulnerability, and solved it with the same dispassionate precision he would apply to a business deal. He was protecting an asset. His asset. The thought should have been demeaning, but instead, it felt like a form of respect. He valued her enough to secure her. Her work continued as before, a bubble of quiet professionalism in the opulent penthouse. She checked Mr. Kang's incision, which was healing cleanly. She administered his medication. She monitored his vitals and kept meticulous charts. But the dynamic between them had changed. The formal boundary between nurse and patient had become something more porous. He was a surprisingly good patient. He followed her instructions to the letter, his discipline absolute. He was also relentlessly observant. He noticed the way she organized her medical cart, the efficiency of her movements. "You never waste a step," he commented one afternoon as she was changing the dressing on his side. He was sitting in an armchair by the window, the gray afternoon light tracing the sharp lines of his face. "Wasted steps get people killed in the ER," she replied without looking up from her task. "You learn to be economical. An economy of motion." He seemed to taste the phrase, to file it away. "It's a valuable trait." They began to share meals. His mother, Mrs. Kang, would insist. She would have the cook prepare trays, and the three of them would eat in the vast, silent living room. The conversations were stilted at first, but Mrs. Kang was a masterful bridge. She would ask Amara about her work, about the books she was reading. She'd noticed Amara eyeing the library, about her life, but never in a way that felt intrusive. She spoke of her own past, of the hardships of war and displacement, drawing a subtle, unspoken line of kinship between her own history of survival and Amara's quiet resilience. "Grace is not the absence of hardship," the old woman said one evening, her dark eyes fixed on Amara. "It is the choice to move through it without being consumed by it. You have that grace." Through these quiet interactions, Amara began to see the man behind the fearsome reputation. Jaehua, as his mother called him, was a man of profound stillness. He would sit for hours, reading or simply looking out at the city, his mind clearly working on complex problems she could only guess at. But when he spoke to her, he was entirely present. He asked for her opinion on the placement of a new painting he had acquired. He asked for her thoughts on a news article about a new medical technology. He was not making small talk, he was gathering data. He valued her intellect, not just her skill. The slow burn of their connection was built on this foundation of mutual recognition. He provided a sanctuary of safety and resources, a place where her competence was the baseline assumption, not something she had to constantly prove. She, in turn, provided a small island of calm, professional normalcy in his rarefied, dangerous world. She was not afraid of him. She did not fawn over him. She treated him exactly as she would any other patient in her care, with a firm, gentle authority. And he, a man who commanded legions, seemed to find a strange comfort in it. One night, as she was preparing his final dose of medication for the evening, he spoke from the shadows of the living room. Jin has concluded his inquiries regarding the former security guard. Amara paused, her hands still. She had not asked. She had tried not to think about Marcus. His name is Marcus Thorne. Mr. Kang continued, his voice a low, even murmur. He has a history of similar complaints at previous jobs, all of which were quietly settled by the security firm. He falsified several credentials on his application. The firm that hired him, Apex Security, has a pattern of such oversights. They prioritize low cost over quality of personnel. He paused. I have acquired Apex Security. Amara turned to look at him. He was standing by the window, a silhouette against the city lights. The statement was so simple, so outrageously disproportionate to the initial offense, that she almost couldn't process it. He hadn't just gotten a man fired. He had bought the entire company to correct a single error. The CEO has certain standards, Mr. Kang said, a flicker of something that might have been dry wit in his tone. I have removed them, mostly. This was his power, not the brutish physical dominance of a man like Marcus, but a deep, quiet, structural power. The power to rewrite the architecture of a person's world with a phone call and a wire transfer. The power to erase a problem from the foundation up. Marcus Thorne is no longer licensed to work in security in this state, he finished. He is currently facing fraud charges related to his falsified credentials. He will be occupied for some time. Amara thought of Marcus's sneering face, his ugly words, the bruising grip on her arm. She felt no pity, only a distant, cold sense of an equation being balanced. She turned back to her medical cart. Thank you for telling me, she said, her voice perfectly even. It's time for your medication. He was watching her, she knew. He was watching to see how she would react to this casual display of absolute power. She simply opened the sterile packaging of a syringe, her hands steady as a surgeon's. She was his nurse. That was the reality of this room. And in this room, she was the one in charge. The slow, respectful development of their relationship depended on that boundary. It was a relationship based on recognition and safety, not passion. A quiet harbor after a long storm. Marcus Thorne did not see it as a balanced equation. In the cramped, sour-smelling apartment he could now barely afford, he saw it as a cosmic injustice. He replayed the scene in the lobby of the Elysian Tower 1,000 times, each viewing burnishing his own victimhood. He had been doing his job. He had been protecting the residents from an interloper, a trespasser. He had been firm, professional. In his version of the story, the nurse, Amara, was a cunning seductress who had somehow tricked the powerful Mr. Kang. She had played the victim, cried her crocodile tears, and had him wrapped around her little finger. He had not been fired for incompetence or prejudice. He had been sacrificed for the new plaything of a reclusive billionaire. The arrogance that had defined him was a stubborn weed. It refused to be uprooted, even in the face of total ruin. The loss of his job, the revocation of his license, the fraud charges, these were not consequences of his actions. They were obstacles, a temporary setback. He was convinced that if he could just speak to Mr. Kang, man to man, and explain the situation, expose the nurse for the fraud she was, everything could be undone. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of Amara that was a figment of his own racist imagination. He was working from a version of Mr. Kang that was a fool, blinded by a pretty face. He completely misread them both. His delusion festered. He started by leaving rambling, furious messages with the new receptionists at Apex Security, demanding to speak to the new owner. The messages were logged, transcribed, and sent directly to Jin. He filed a frivolous complaint with the state nursing board against Amara, alleging unprofessional conduct and a compromising relationship with a patient. The complaint was flagged, cross-referenced with the ongoing fraud charges against him, and forwarded to Jin's legal team, who had it dismissed within 48 hours. Each failure only fed his sense of righteous fury. He was being silenced, erased. It wasn't fair. He began to watch her. He learned the schedule of the black car. He learned that on 2 days a week, she didn't go to the Elysian Tower. She went to her old job, the hospital, where she still worked a few shifts per week. She had refused to give it up completely, a tether to her old life, to her identity outside the golden cage of the penthouse. Mr. Kang, surprisingly, had understood. One should never be entirely dependent on a single system, he had said. It creates vulnerabilities. To Marcus, this was his opportunity. The hospital was public ground, neutral territory. There, she wouldn't be protected by the fortress of the penthouse. He could confront her, expose her in front of her colleagues, create a scene so public and so damaging that her reputation would be shattered. He believed, with the unshakable faith of the truly stupid, that this would vindicate him. He waited. He chose a Thursday, the end of her shift. He sat in his beat-up sedan across the street from the hospital's staff exit, his heart pounding with a mixture of rage and anticipation. He saw other nurses and doctors leaving, tired but chattering amongst themselves. Then he saw her. Amara emerged, walking with a colleague, another nurse. They were laughing about something. The sight of her, looking relaxed and happy, poured gasoline on the fire of his resentment. How dare she be happy after what she had done to him? He got out of his car. He did not have a plan, not really, just a burning need to confront, to accuse, to tear down. He strode across the street, his movements jerky with adrenaline. "Amara Okoro!" he shouted. Amara and her friend Lena stopped. Amara's smile vanished, replaced by a look of weary recognition. She had felt it for the past week, a prickling on the back of her neck, the sense of being watched. She had mentioned it to Mr. An, the driver, who had simply nodded and said, "It is being monitored." She had hoped it was just paranoia, a phantom limb of her old fear. Seeing Marcus standing there, his face twisted in a mask of rage, confirmed it wasn't. "Marcus," she said, her voice low and steady. "You shouldn't be here." "Oh, I shouldn't be here," he said, his voice loud, drawing the attention of others leaving the hospital. "I'm not the one who's a liar and a cheat. I'm not the one sleeping with her patient to get a paycheck." Lena gasped, stepping in front of Amara protectively. "You need to leave, right now, or I'm calling security." "She's got you all fooled, doesn't she?" Marcus sneered, jabbing a finger toward Amara. "Playing the poor, innocent nurse. She got me fired, ruined my life, all because she couldn't handle a real man doing his job." The scene was escalating exactly as he'd hoped. People were stopping to stare. A hospital security guard was starting to walk toward them from the entrance. This was it. Her public humiliation. Amara felt a cold calm settle over her. She looked past Marcus's contorted face, past the gawking onlookers. She looked at the Blacktown car parked at the curb, exactly where it always was. Mr. An was no longer in the driver's seat. He was standing by the rear passenger door, which was slightly ajar. Standing next to him, almost invisible against the evening shadows, was Jin. He was on his phone. The trap was not for her. It was for him. He had walked right into it. "You're making a mistake, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying a note of finality that he was too enraged to hear. "The only mistake was ever letting you into that building," he spat, taking another step toward her. The hospital guard was almost there, reaching for his radio. "Mr. Thorne." The voice was quiet, amplified by no electronic means, yet it cut through the noise of the street like a razor. It came from a man who had just stepped out of a second black car, one that had pulled up silently behind Marcus's own pathetic vehicle. The man was older, with a kind face and wearing a beautifully cut tweed jacket. He looked like a university professor. He was holding a slim leather portfolio. Marcus spun around, bewildered. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Michael Choi. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Kang," the man said pleasantly. "I was just on my way to file a temporary restraining order against you on behalf of my client's employee, Miss Okoro. Your presence here has made that process much simpler. It also constitutes a clear violation of your parole terms for the fraud conviction. The officers are on their way." As if on cue, a police car, which had been parked a block down, flashed its lights and began to roll toward them. The attorney, Mr. Choi, opened his portfolio. "We also have this. It's a civil suit for defamation, stalking, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We have logged 72 threatening voicemails, the fraudulent and dismissed nursing board complaint, and have digital and eyewitness testimony of your surveillance of Miss Okoro for the last 11 days. Your former employer, Apex Security, which as you know is a new subsidiary of Kang Enterprises, has also provided a full file on your previous conduct. It seems you have a type." Marcus's face, which had been flushed with rage, was now the color of ash. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The entire structure of his reality, built on a foundation of blustering self-importance, was dissolving in real time. The hospital guard had arrived, flanked now by 2 uniformed police officers. Mr. Choi continued in his calm, professorial tone, as if discussing a mildly interesting legal theory. "Mr. Kang is a man who values systems. When a component of a system proves to be defective and actively malicious, he believes in thorough removal and recycling. The damages we are seeking will ensure you are financially insolvent for the remainder of your natural life. The criminal charges will ensure you are otherwise occupied. Any questions?" Marcus looked from the lawyer to the police officers to Amara. He saw her face, calm and impassive. He saw Jin across the street, putting his phone away. He saw the whole intricate, invisible web that had been woven around him, a web he had been too arrogant and too blind to see. He had thought he was the hunter. He had been the prey all along. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a groveling, pathetic terror. He dropped to his knees on the dirty pavement. "No, please," he whimpered, the sound thin and reedy. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Tell him I'm sorry." The words dissolved into incoherent sobs. His performative toughness, the hollow shell of his masculinity, had shattered completely, leaving only the sniveling, terrified man-child at its core. One of the police officers took his arm. "Sir, you need to come with us." Marcus didn't seem to hear. He was still looking at Amara, his face a mess of tears and desperation. "Please," he begged. Amara simply held his gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned, took Lena's arm, and walked toward the waiting car. She did not look back as they pulled Marcus to his feet and led him, stumbling and weeping, to the police cruiser. She did not need to. It was over. The problem had been removed. The aftermath was characterized by a profound and enveloping quiet. The public ruin of Marcus Thorne was a brief, ugly flare that quickly extinguished, leaving no trace in Amara's world. There were no more shadows at the edge of her vision, no more prickling sensations on her neck. The legal machinery that Mr. Kang had set in motion moved silently, far below the surface of her daily life, grinding Marcus's future into dust. She never heard his name again. The incident, however, had clarified things. It had been the final, brutal test of her new reality. Mr. Kang had not just offered her a job. He had offered her a form of sovereignty, a protected space where her worth was not a matter for debate. He had drawn a line around her, and the consequences for crossing that line were absolute. Her relationship with him deepened, settling into a comfortable, quiet rhythm. The lines between nurse and patient, employer and employee began to blur into something new, something for which she had no name. It was a partnership built not on romantic passion, but on a bedrock of mutual respect and a shared understanding of how the world worked. He respected her competence, her resilience, her unshakable calm. She respected his precision, his intellect, and the fierce, implacable loyalty he showed to those he chose to value. He recovered fully from his surgery. Soon, there was no medical reason for her to be there. The dressings were gone, the medications discontinued. Yet she stayed. Her role evolved. She was no longer just his nurse. She became his confidant, his advisor, a steady, grounding presence in his life of high stakes and silent violence. One evening, months after the incident with Marcus, Mr. Kang called her into his study. It was a room she had never been in, lined with dark wood and filled with the scent of leather and paper. He was not wearing a suit, but a simple black cashmere sweater and trousers. He looked less like a Mafia boss and more like a scholar. He gestured to a chair opposite his large, uncluttered desk. On it were a series of architectural drawings and a thick business proposal. "I have been thinking about systems," he began, his voice low and thoughtful. "The healthcare system in this country is profoundly broken. It is inefficient, reactive, and often cruel, especially for the most vulnerable." Amara nodded, thinking of the daily triage in the ER, the bureaucratic nightmares, the patients who fell through the cracks. "It's a business, not a service," she agreed. "Exactly," he said. "A poorly run business. I am proposing a new one." He pushed the proposal across the desk toward her. "A private, subscription-based medical service. Proactive, holistic, and deeply personalized. The highest level of care, from diagnostics to home treatment, for a select clientele. It would require a director with unimpeachable medical credentials, an innate understanding of logistics, and the grace to manage difficult personalities." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. "It would require you." Amara stared at him, then down at the proposal. The name on the front was the Okoro Initiative. She opened it. It was not a vague idea. It was a fully formed business plan, complete with funding sources, market analysis, staffing projections, and legal frameworks. He had built her a company, an empire in miniature. "This is," she started, searching for a word. "Logical," he finished for her. "You are the most capable person I have ever met. Your talent is being wasted in a broken system. I am simply creating a new system with you at its center. You would be the CEO. I would be a silent partner, your partner." The vindication was so total, so absolute, that it stole her breath. He was not just protecting her. He was not just providing for her. He was seeing her in her entirety and building a world that fit the scale of her abilities. He was giving her the power that men like Marcus had tried to deny she could ever possess. She looked at the plans, at the future he had laid out on the desk. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," he said. "Your mother's care has been moved to the top floor of the new facility. She likes the view." Amara's head snapped up. He had already done it. He had already built the first facility. He was not asking for her permission. He was, as always, stating a fact. A slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had given him. It reached her eyes. "You're impossible," she said, the words full of warmth. "I am efficient," he corrected gently. That night marked the true beginning. The Okoro Initiative launched 6 months later. It was an immediate success, a quiet revolution in private health care. Amara moved from the penthouse to her own apartment in the Elysian Tower, 1 floor below Mr. Kang's. She was no longer an employee, but a neighbor, an equal. Their evenings were still spent together. They would have dinner, sometimes with his mother, sometimes just the two of them. They would talk about their days, her challenges in building a new company, his in managing his vast, shadowy one. They stood on her balcony one cool autumn evening, looking out at the city that was now, in a small but significant way, hers. He stood beside her, not touching, but his presence was a solid, comforting warmth in the cool air. The city lights glittered below, a sea of a million stories. Her own story had been one of quiet endurance, of swimming against a relentless tide. Now, the tide was at her back. She thought about the long journey from the frantic chaos of the ER to this silent, peaceful height. She thought about the weight of her past, a cloak she had worn for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. Now it was gone. In its place was a profound sense of peace, a slow exhale that had been held for a lifetime, a feeling of being correctly placed in the universe. "I never thought my life would be like this," she said softly, her voice carrying on the breeze. Jae-hwa looked at her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "Your life was always going to be extraordinary, Amara. You just needed to be in a system that was designed to recognize it." He reached out then, his hand covering hers where it rested on the balcony railing. His touch was not possessive, but grounding, a quiet statement of fact. You are here. You are safe. You belong. Theirs was not a story of grand passion or whirlwind romance. It was a story built from quieter, stronger materials: honesty, respect, and the daily choice to see and support one another. It was a partnership of equals, forged in a moment of crisis and tempered in the peaceful days that followed. Looking out at the endless horizon, their hands linked together, they were not looking at a happily ever after. They were looking at what comes next, together. A family built not from obligation, but from complication, recognition, and the profound, steady peace of finding your one, true, safe harbor in the storm.